She was an old grandmother, and even though she had children of her own and grandchildren, it did not make her any more pleasant to this world. She enjoyed the mean streak that she held inside of her heart. It brought a warmth to her old bones and to her blood. But on one dark and starry night, she decided that under the guise of pretending to knit, she would go out and count her money. Oh, a knitting bag filled with wool and knitting needles was a good place to hide all of her money, because she did not trust anybody. She thought that she would take her knitting and her money inside of her pockets and inside of the bag. And down by the edge of the rough sea, where there were many rock pools, she would enjoy the fact that as the rain fell, it would make her fingers wet, and the smell of money would rise high above the smell of the seaweed. And now as she counted her money, for she didn't trust anyone, she counted and smiled and realised that the more she had, the more she could keep, and the less she would have to share. And that was really what made her so mean, that she had so much when everyone else had so little. But now, at the edge of the sea, where there were many rock pools, she could see the crabs by the light of the moon moving this way and that. She sat herself down, and there was the click-clack, 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 click of her knitting needles, and she felt sure that no one had followed her to that place. And so she took out her money. She would raise the golden coins up to her teeth and bite at it to make sure that it was truly gold. She would count the notes and love the way that the water on her fingers would transfer the colour of the inks on the paper to her own fingers, and the smell would still rise above the smell of the sea and the seaweed. But she wondered what she was going to do with all of this money and how much good it would do her, when, in the darkness, all of a sudden there came a great light. And it was then that she looked down and she could see that the waves were covered with litter and debris that had floated up and onto the shore and into the rock pools, and she might have felt sad. But it was the very fact that there was suddenly a bright light that went on and off and on and off, and she looked and she saw a tall building, a lighthouse, where there had never been a lighthouse before, and there was a great curiosity in her heart. So she decided that she would go to this tall old lighthouse and see who it was who was inside of that place. But she made sure that she buried her gold and her paper notes inside of the pocket of her dress. The wind was blowing so hard that as she reached her hand up to pull at the knocker upon the door, the wind blew it and slammed it against the door, and the door was opened, and she was still standing there with her hand half up into the air. And the door was opened by a giant of a man with dark eyebrows above his eyes, and he was brushing his teeth at the same time. "What is it that you want?" And even above the sound of the sea and the smell of the sea, he looked at her and smiled. "You're someone who has a great liking of money." She wondered how he could know. She wondered if he could see inside of her soul and could see the fact that she had money about her person. But he did not invite her in. "If you want to know where there's more money, then what you need to do is, and I'll tell you this, you need to go to the sea." And here he gave her a rod and a line and a hook. For there's a lot of money at the bottom of the sea. He did not say how she was going to get it, but by the way that he had handed her the rod, the line and the hook, she thought that if she stood by the side of the sea, then she could cast that line out and she would pull up boxes of treasure. So she didn't hesitate. Never a word of thank you to this man. She pushed the knitting inside of her pocket. But as she was walking to the edge of the sea, holding on to the rod and line, she was so excited that she did not notice that the knitting fell from out of her pocket and trailed over the rough rocks. But she stood by the side of the sea, cast out the line, and started to draw it in. But she did not catch anything, and again she threw it in. But she thought that what she needed to do was to go a little closer to the edge of the sea, and so she took a step forward. and out she cast the line again and reeled it in, to find nothing more than the hook at the end of the line. And again and again and again she kept casting the line out, and then when she felt something at the other end, she licked at her lips in anticipation, thinking that there would be a great box of treasure at the other end of the line. And so she pulled, and even though the wind blew, and even though it was heavy on the line, she still pulled. But it was then that her feet slipped upon the seaweed and she fell into the water. Now the weight of the gold and the money in her pockets felt heavy, but she wasn't going to cast it out of her pockets, for she was going to have a greater prize when she got down to this box of treasure that she imagined at the other end of the line. But further and further, her own greed, as she pulled on the line and the rod and the reel, pulled her deeper under the water until she tried to take a breath, and she knew that she must try and get herself up to the top of the water so that she could breathe. And the next morning, her grandchildren came to that place, and even though their grandmother had been unpleasant and unkind to them, they decided that they would go and visit her. They found her house door unopened. All they could find of her was wool, an interminable thing that was part knitted, and her 2 knitting needles by the side of the rough and the rocky sea.